with that. Maybe not in your elementary years, but maybe. And then certainly as you get older and into purity culture, and, you know, I mean, for me, like, I was so steeped in purity culture. I had this whole event around my 13th birthday that was like this coming of womanhood ceremony where everybody came and all my relatives from states away. And like, it was this huge deal. And so looking back, like, I feel like purity and culture like informs so much of my life and my understanding of self, and in my ability to even realize that I was gay until my 20s, because, you know, purity culture taught you that you were not allowed to date. And I just believe that, like, well, if I just serve God with my life and I do the right thing and I keep serving God, like, eventually this knight in shining armor is going to come in on a white horse and sweep me off my feet to happily ever after, right?
Yep.
And so I literally would like look at my friends and be like, watching them like dating and breaking up, and I was like, thank God that's not me. Like, God's sparing me from all that heartache, you know?
Yeah.
And like, meanwhile, I'm totally oblivious to even my own sexuality.
I feel you there. I feel you there. I literally was so steeped in purity culture. I still have my True Love Waits card in one of my Bibles from when I was younger. Yeah.
If you could pause this, mine is literally in the other room right now. I found it 2 days ago when I was going through stuff.
Oh my God. Yes, you should go grab it. We'll pause the recording. I got to see this.
Okay. Stand by.
Oh my God.
And we're back. See that? See that?
Yep.
You see that?
Right there. Oh man.
That right there.
That brings back.
Looking for the moment. Been looking for the moment. Maybe this is the moment. Should I do it?
Yes, you should do it. Do it. Do it. Do it. Yes.
Yes.
Yes. Oh my God, this is the perfect moment. Yes.
Now we need a match to light it on fire.
I feel like this is a historic moment. I love it.
It is.
And I was so steeped in that, you know, like I have the card. I was actually looking around, but it's at my house, not in my office. But I was so steeped in that purity culture. Get this, please try to not laugh too hard because it'll mess up the audio levels. But I actually thought I was just going to be a celibate missionary. That was it. I had literally, being gay was so far out of my mind that being a celibate missionary was more in my frame of reference than being gay. Like, what?
It was literally in my hope chest that was given me 13th birthday to keep all the hopes and dreams for my future husband and family in that chest.
Oh my gosh. I see, purity culture in general does such a disservice because, first of all, it tells us that we're like used. I mean, I've been compared to chewed gum, crumpled up paper, a flower with its petals torn off, you know, X, Y, and Z. That's what my sexuality was compared to. Never men's sexuality, first of all, just mine as a female Christian. But it does such a disservice because there's so many things you need to learn about self. And you don't learn those things by this crazy avoidance. Now, that's not to say that other cultural beliefs in terms of like arranged marriage and stuff, I think those things have a place. But purity culture in general teaches you to not trust yourself, to believe that you are evil, and to just completely disavow that part of your life. Well, then what happens when you get to the altar? You've never kissed anybody. You've never touched yourself. You don't know what you like. You don't know what you want. Like, that's a recipe for
disaster.
Yeah, it's a recipe for disaster. It's a recipe for bad relationships. It's a recipe for staying in abusive situations. And that's kind of, people don't think about that. They just think about that card and that pledge and that moment of purity declaration. And it's actually a recipe for being abused, you know? So you grew up steeped in that. So let's talk about
so much guilt and shame wrapped up in all of that.
So much guilt and shame. Absolutely. Yeah. So how did you get from, you know, voice actor for Adventures in Odyssey and signing the purity pledge to where you began to sort of break out of that? Like, what was the first thing that fractured your worldview?
Well, I fell in love with my female roommate.
That'll do it.
And that will do it. Yeah, like, it was this epiphany of horror, because it was like you said, like, you've never experienced, like, you don't even know your own body. You don't know how to connect with, like you're, everything is like literally foreign to you.
Yes.
And then I start having these feelings, and it was like this like confluence of like the most amazing things, because you're like realizing love for the same time, for the first time, and like also like this incredible amount of guilt and shame, because you're not supposed to feel that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
You're especially not supposed to feel that towards someone of the same sex.
Definitely not.
And so the amount of guilt and shame that came with that was just overwhelming, because it was like my body was lighting up for the first time and feeling alive.
Right.
Not supposed to feel that. And so I felt like I just got kind of thrown into this world of shame and guilt and trying to grapple with that. Like, what do you do with that? Right. Really, it sent me to some very dark places. Like, I was dealing with a lot of depression and anxiety, self-harm, suicidal ideation, and like I just started spiraling. And it got to the point where I was like I remember thinking like, God's never gonna want to use me now, because I lost my virginity to a female. And so then it was like, okay, one, you've lost your virginity, which is huge. And then you've done it with somebody of the same gender. Yep. Like the two worst things you could possibly put together. Yep. And so I remember thinking like, God is never going to use me again. Like, I am tainted, I am used, I am garbage. Like, no man's going to want me now. God doesn't want me now. I am just dirt, and I felt so bad about myself. And it got to the point that I was like, I either have to look this fear in the face, or it's going to be the thing that kills me.
Yes, I totally resonate with that. Like, it got to the point where I couldn't ignore it anymore. It, like you said, it was the intersection of these two things. Like, I'm feeling and I'm opening up and I'm awakening, but I'm hating myself for it, right? And I think that's sort of something that purity culture does, and something that evangelicalism does, and also capitalism and patriarchy, but that's for another podcast. But I think there are these systems that teach us that what we need is located out of ourselves, and that is literally the definition of dissociation, right? And some of the biggest emotional and mental health issues involve us disassociating from our tangible being, right? When people come up against trauma, they disassociate. When people come up against a hard situation, they disassociate. When we come up against stress, we disassociate. But literally, purity culture and evangelicalism teach us that our body is here and everything that's good is outside of it. It sets us up to be continually wanting something that we don't have, instead of believing that there's divinity within us.
Well, and it also teaches us not to trust our own inner voice, our inner knowing.
Yep.
And trust, like, explicitly the people in authority over us. The answers. Yep. Which also sets us up for huge failure.
Absolutely. What was the sort of intersection of that idea when all of this was happening? Like, you're having this awakening, you're going through some self-loathing, some mental health issues, but what was the leadership like around you? Who did you have outside of you? Who were you talking to, and how did that go?
Well, I really didn't have a lot. I did make the mistake of going to like, excuse me, our essentially like our youth leader, for like adults, which was such a bad idea, like such a mistake, right?
Oh no.
You know where that's going, you know how it goes. Like, it just never ends up good. So, but outside of that, I really didn't have much to go, because I knew like the world, especially in Colorado Springs with a dad that's in this prominent position at Focus on the Family, like people knew us, people knew our family. I was kind of seen as this poster child. And so I didn't really have a safe place to go and talk about this, and to ask questions and to figure things out. And so I literally remember like sitting at my computer typing one day, and I was terrified, but typing in gay Christian church or something, just to see like if these two worlds could even possibly exist, because I was taught they couldn't. And a church in Denver came up, and of course there was like nothing in the Springs. And this was like, a decade or more ago. So this was even before affirming churches were very popular.
Yeah.
And so I had found this one church, and I reached out to him, and I told, like, I was at the end of my rope, so I didn't know what to do. And I just poured my heart out to this pastor and sent it off into cyberspace. And I didn't think I'd ever get a response because I grew up in a mega church. I went to New Life Church for 14 years. And so, like, you send something off into cyberspace, it never comes back, you know. If it does, it's gone through like 3 secretaries and different, you know.
Yep.
And so I just sent it off, and it was not more than probably 2 or 3 hours before I got this long, heartfelt response from the pastor himself. And he just was like, please come, please, you know, visit. I'll set you up with somebody to take you to lunch and show you around. And that was a huge turning point for me. Able to go and be in this place where these things could exist. And I could see that it was possible. Like, I was meeting these people who had been, you know, in love with God and then had a same-sex partner or spouse for 20, 30 years, and there was no conflict for them. And I just remember thinking, like, this is the most beautiful thing I've ever seen.
Yeah.
And something changed for me in that moment. And I remember, like, going home and writing in my journal, like, something to the effect of, like, I've passed the point of no return. Like, going back, I've seen it's possible now, and there's no going back from that.
Absolutely. Yeah. Like, you have this moment of, holy shit, this is real. Like, this is a thing. And, you know, I don't think that people, you know, even if you come from the gay Christian world, you don't have to stay landing in the Christian world. But I think that's a crucial step out, is that realization that, like, there's place, right, where I can exist. And wherever you go from that point. So I think a lot of people need that jumping point to get to what's next for them, right? They need to know that they can exist in this space, and then you can figure out the rest, because what you were previously dealing with was unreconcilable. So at least you have this space to process what's next, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. Like you said at the beginning, I really appreciate what you said about, like, it's not that you have to end up in this space, but to know that you can if you want to. And like you said, it's a stepping stone to whatever's next for you. And that looks different for every person, right?
Absolutely.
Depending on our experiences and our journey of where we end up.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think that it's similar. Coming out as a gay Christian is similar to the experience of deconstruction, in so much as it's not a destination, it's a process, right? And we're not all going to end up at the same space, but kind of the point of coming out of evangelicalism is that it's no one else's choice but my own, right? Like, this is a descriptive journey, not a prescriptive journey.
Right. Absolutely.
So what happened for you from that moment, right? So that was, you said, roughly 10 years ago. What's been this sort of evolution since you found that first space where you were just acknowledged, right? What did that shake up within you? Where have you been since then? Like, talk to me a little bit about that.
So that was probably about 12 years ago, because then after that, I went through a period of a couple of years of just trying to figure everything out before I formally came out. And I've formally out for almost exactly 10 years. Okay. So when I came, you know, like, once I had kind of done that reconciling for myself and was, like, at peace with who I was, then I knew I couldn't hide it anymore. You know, like, living to be somebody or not is exhausting. And trying to put up that facade is exhausting. So I just got to the point where I was like, I have to be honest. Like, I can't keep this up. This is awful. And so I came out to my parents, and it went exactly like you imagine it would for the daughter of, you know, somebody in a high position at Focus on the Family.
I feel you.
Yeah, I'm sure you do. And so I mean, initially my dad walked out, and we had the conversation. It was like, we feel like you died. How dare you do this to our family? They compared me to murderers and pedophiles, and it just was awful upon awful. So I mean, they basically ended up disowning me, taking away the keys to their house, you know, everything that so many of us have experienced. And I had contact with them in close to a decade. So
oh wow, so there's been no sort of reconciliation conversation?
No, there's been no reconciliation.
I'm so sorry to hear that.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, I'm very blessed now blessed, if we still use that term.
Right.
Blessed, you know, like, what do you do with that? But I feel very grateful to have some incredible people in my life.
Yeah.
Have become like surrogate family. I feel like it takes some time to kind of find that and develop that. But once do, it's so rich and rewarding because they're people that truly love you for who you are. And there's no caveats, there's no buts, there's no exceptions. And it's just the best feeling in the world. And so I'm really, really grateful that I have some of those people in my life now.
Yeah.
I mean, that experience is what launched me into the work that I do, right? Mm-hmm. Like that's what's gotten me to where I am. And I'm very passionate about helping other people with backgrounds like ours mm-hmm. to help them navigate that coming out process, to help them navigate that deconstruction and that reconciliation between their faith and their sexuality, and just know that they can be who they are and that they are still loved by God. Yeah. And that they have that faith or that belief or whatever they want that to look like for them without any conflict in between.
Absolutely.
And so I've published a few books, and I've done a lot of speaking and coaching and mentoring with people all over. My first book was Refocusing My Family. And that was my memoir. That was my growing up and coming out mm-hmm. experience. And once that published and I started speaking publicly, I just quickly realized, like, this is not just my story. Like, your dad does not have to work at Focus for this to be your story. This is the story of hundreds and thousands of kids all over the world, you know? And I started receiving messages from people all over the world. And so that just quickly made me realize, like, this is a huge impact on hundreds and thousands of people that all have stories just like mine.
Yeah.
Influenced by Focus, that have been influenced by James Dobson or Odyssey or whatever it may be, that are going through and experiencing these same things. Mm-hmm. And so pretty quickly after that, I ended up writing my second book, which I didn't plan on. I was so wiped out after the first. I was like, don't even talk to me. Like,
right.
Or 5 or 10. And I ended up pretty quickly writing the second book, which is Unashamed. And that was kind of this holistic approach to coming out for
Mm-hmm.
Christians or people of faith. Nothing like that on the market. There was nothing.
There's not.
And so this was the first, and I was able to take this holistic approach of like, okay, what do we do with our internalized homophobia and transphobia? Where does that come from? How do we do that? How do we change the way that we view God so we can change the way that we view ourselves?
Yeah.
How do we know when we're ready to come out? How do we do that process well? How do we set boundaries? How do we grieve loss and rejection and like all those things? Mm-hmm. So really this holistic approach to coming out. And then I also like had a section at the end of each chapter for parents and allies. So it was like, this is how you support your loved ones at each point in their process. Mm-hmm. And I tried to take like all the most commonly asked questions that I was getting at all my events and like include that, because I felt like I was getting the same questions everywhere I went, you know, like, how do I know when I'm ready to come out? And what do I do if my parents are in ministry? Or what do I do if I'm in ministry? Or, you know, and it was just like a revolving door. So it was really me trying to get those tools into the hands of people that really desperately needed them.
I'm really interested. I saw that on your website, and I want to read your story, and I love hearing your story, but I'm particularly interested for that book in the space that it fills in our shared world, because I was doing the math in my head while you were talking, and you and I must have come out at the same time, because I was coming out about 12 years ago, right? Except I was on the East Coast in the evangelical world at Nyack College, which is actually where, you know, our mutual friend Glenn went. But I was there with people who were high up in Christian Missionary Alliance leadership, and I've known them for my whole life, and they swore up and down that I was going to be the first ordained female in the Christian Missionary Alliance. And I was on that trajectory. Like, that's what I did. I've been preaching and leading worship and working in public positions for a long time by the time I got to college. And then these folks who were high up at the college, high up at Alliance Theological Seminary, and on track to be in Colorado Springs in leadership. For those of you who don't know, Colorado Springs is like the epicenter of the American evangelical world. Christian Kobe Dumais wrote about the importance of Colorado Springs in Jesus and John Wayne. I'd highly encourage you to check it out. But it's sort of like Utah for the Mormons. Like, it's like boom, right there. And so I had all these important people telling me all these things, and this very specific couple who was like, you know, you're basically part of our family. And then when I came out, I've literally not talked to them since because they wouldn't. And so we came out in very similar and equally, I would say, overlapping specters, but just on the opposite side of the world. But I always like to say I came out around the time Katy Perry's I Kissed a Girl did. It's a perfect pun there. But yeah, we came out in very similar settings, and there's so much psychological manipulation that's done by evangelicalism, by conservatism, by specifically American evangelicalism, and by purity culture. And so I think your book stands to be a really great tool for people who are trying to unfuck themselves from that realm of theology, because you can't move forward until you deal with that particular trauma of bad theology. And so I feel like your book would be a particularly beneficial tool as a transition into whatever people want to go to next, because it helps clear up these psychological hangups and theological misgivings in a way that only someone with a voice from within could present. So I really like that idea. What was some of that process like for you, and some of those things you had to undo? Like, if you don't mind sharing some specifics.
Yeah, and I wouldn't say that I go into theology a lot in the book, because I think there's other people that have done that a lot
Absolutely
better.
Yeah, it's like a practical theological aspect.
It's very practical. Yes, it's a very much a practical book that you can go through and just get lots of tools and tips of like how to do this. And I feel like it came, like the book was written from like the School of Hard Knocks, right?
Right.
Like, I wish I would have known, or somebody would have told me when I was coming out.
Yeah.
And were you going to say something?
No, I was just going to say, I think that's exactly, it's like a practical theological aspect, because we are taught in our brand of Christendom, we're taught specific attributes of God. And then those attributes of God fall down upon the people that we love and that are in leadership or relational status above us. And then we believe all these things. And so it's not necessarily that you're dissecting the theology, but you're kind of dealing with the ramifications of the bad theology and the things that teaches us about the world.
Right. Yeah, and I think probably one of the things I get questions on the most is boundaries, because I feel like growing up in that evangelical space, we were not taught boundaries, right? You were not allowed to set boundaries. Disagreeing with your parents was disrespectful, and the pastor was like the voice of God for you, and you were not to question that. And so taught, and is therefore very detrimental to us as queer people. So we have to learn how to set boundaries for our physical health, for our mental health, for our emotional health, for our spiritual health. And I think that that's something that will probably continue to, like, I still feel like I'm practicing that. Like, there's still ways that I need to improve on that. And I feel like that's one of the things that we need the most when we're coming out of that evangelical space as a queer person.
Yeah, I had a friend tell me a couple really important things, and one of them was you're allowed to disagree with your parents, and you're actually allowed to not agree to see them unless you know you have your own ride to the situation, not a metaphor, but like unless you have a way out of that situation, you don't have to go to it, and you don't have to attend. And you don't have to engage in conversations where you're being disrespected from the point of invitation. It's so funny. Also, my friend said that God is big enough to handle your anger. And I was like, whoa, you're allowed to be angry with God? I mean, the name Israel literally means to wrestle with God, but I didn't have that framework. And so those couple things really, really changed my perspective on being able to function. And I remember sitting in my first intro to pastoral ministry class, and we were on a chapter talking about establishing boundaries between, the pastors and parishioners and the elders and all the different relationships you have to manage when you're in leadership in a church. And I remember thinking, yeah, like I hear you say boundaries, but that's just not the way I like to do things. And now at like a decade and a fifth later, I'm like, gosh, you're so foolish, man. Just the boundaries, bro.
You need boundaries. We all need boundaries. Boundaries are healthy.
Yes, boundaries are healthy, and they help us filter things, and they help protect us, and they help us like really give appropriate amounts of energy to different types of relationships. But we weren't taught that, right? We weren't taught that theologically. It didn't play out in our church structure. It didn't play out in our family structure. So why would I supposed to have just known that going into, ministry? So just like these weird things that I learned, like you said, like I was saying, and you were saying, like, it's just a practical offshoot of the things that we're taught growing up in that environment. And a lot of those things are things you need to navigate coming out when you're coming out of that environment.
Yeah. And one thing that I often, like in relation to boundaries, tell people is you do not have to debate theology. Like, you do not have to defend your existence to the world by debating theology with your parents or with your church. Like, that is not your job.
Nope.
And you bow out of that and say, no, thank you.
Anytime.
Like,
I actually follow this account on TikTok.
Engage in that conversation.
Yeah, you don't have to. No,
I actually
I follow this account on TikTok, and this girl has a Cameo, and you can purchase a certain amount of time for her where she'll go and debate your family. So on theology. So you don't have to do it. You can pay her on Cameo to debate your family, but you don't have to. And I've come to a place in my life where I'm not debating. I don't need to have a queer apologetic. I don't need an apologetic for existence because I fucking exist. And I can debate theology. I choose not to, because I'm not going to live in that space. That's not my work. It's someone's work who it's not so personal for. I was not called to that. But literally, I can prove you wrong. I just don't have time for your shit,
Well, if they really care about you and they really want to learn, they can go and read a book. There's some books out there now. They can go and learn from themselves. And if they don't, and they just want to debate for the sake of debating, like, no amount of talking to your blue in the face is going to change their mind.
Correct.
It's just not good or healthy for you.
Correct. You can go all the way back to like the 4th century, like Gregory of Nyssa, like early church mothers and fathers that have queer theology. Right? If you want to know, you can know on any level you want. You can read a firsthand account that's written in our modern day and vernacular. You can go all the way back to the 4th century, but motherfucker, it is not my job to take you there. And like you said, their mind is already made. They didn't come to the conversation to change their opinion. They came to change your opinion. Exactly. And I don't have any time for that.
It's not your job to prove your existence to the world or to just defend it. That is fucking exhausting.
It is. It's exhausting. And I did that for the first, let's say, maybe 3 to 5 years that I was out. I did that. And you know what? I just don't care to anymore. I don't care to. I will tell you what I've learned. I will tell you what I've thought about. I will tell you what I've studied, but I'm not going to debate whether or not I did it. On TikTok, I always get guess you haven't read the Bible. I'm like, bitch, which language? Which translation do you want to know? Because I fucking read the Bible, okay? But I'm not here to debate that with you. If you want to go read it, I'll give you some resources, but like, otherwise, fuck out of here. Yeah. This is going to be an explicit version of the podcast. I'm sorry.
Right. Disclaimer on it.
It's so important though, and especially when you come out of an environment that's not affirming, and when, like yourself, when you're still with have a family that's not affirming, it would do you no good in year 10 or 12 to keep debating them. It would only do violence to you. And at some point, it's not worth your own, we all have this much emotional capacity, and motherfuckers want to take up this much with their debate of our existence. That's not fair.
Well, and if you're 10 or 12, you need to find a safe person to confide in, yes. Like find a GSA at your school or a safe adult or a safe teacher, and use that as your outlet rather than your home.
Yes.
At home.
That's another really important thing that you brought up that I'd love to talk about, is that finding that chosen family, that support structure, that sort of thing. One of my friends is Mama Jill Wallace. She's real big on TikTok. She's just a mom of gay kids. I love her to death, man. She lived in a small town right next to me, which is so wild. She's this mega influencer, right, on TikTok. Lived in the next town over from me. But one of the things she says all the time is like, babies, you need to make sure you're safe before you come out. And I think that's one of the best pieces of advice. Do you run into, what do you run into in regards to that conversation a lot in your work? Because I'm sure
I say that all the time. Like, I feel like one of the biggest pieces of advice I can give anybody before they come out is to build a safe community, to build a affirming community of people that love you for who you are. Because you're going to need them on the other side of that conversation.
Mm-hmm.
How things go down with your family or your church or your job or whatever, you're going to need safe people on the other side. And the more that you're able to cultivate that before you come out, the better off you're going to be after. And so I've got a whole section in the Unashamed book that talks about that, about building community and finding that safe space before you come out. I feel like it helps mitigate so much by just having that support system that you know you can lean on.
Absolutely. I mean, especially when you look at the statistics about LGBTQ youth and even adults, but in particular LGBTQ youth and trans youth who who have experienced very, very negative and life-altering effects after coming out. It's really important that you have sort of a safety net set up before, because there are, I mean, it's 2022, there are safety nets that exist. You might have to find them, but don't go it alone, and don't go without a safety net, because if things go sideways, we don't want, you don't need to be another statistic about a homeless trans youth. You don't need to be another statistic about a person who experienced abuse because of coming out. Like, have your safety net set up ahead of time, because that's so important practically to have and to be, because there's a good chance you're going to need it. And even if you don't need it forever, you probably will need it right after, right?
Yeah. I mean, I have this whole section that just asks questions, because your safety is the most important thing, right? And so it's like, think through these things before you come out. There's no rush to come out.
Correct.
Like, you have to do it tomorrow, you have to do it next month, you don't have to do it next year. You'll know when you're ready, but you need to make sure that you're safe. Yeah. So do you have a place to go? Do you have a place to live? Do you have a safe person you can talk to? Do you have, like all these things that you need to think through? Do you have a car? Do you have, like all these things practically that you need to think through and make sure that you are safe and secure before you come out, because you just don't know what's going to happen, and making sure that you are in a good place is the most important thing.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, I can't remember from reading your website, but where do you happen to live geographically now?
I'm in Denver.
Denver. Okay, cool. So you're still fairly close to the Springs.
Fairly close, yes.
Do you, just out of curiosity, do you attend that church that you came out to the pastor of, or where do you stand in regards to your sort of own faith journey right now?
Yeah, I'm not a part of any like particular church at this point. But I feel like I really gain a lot from just conversations like this, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like these conversations are more life-giving and spiritual and meaningful than what I'm getting. And I mean, pandemic too, like I'm immunocompromised, so going anywhere is not safe for me right now. And so I just feel like for me, I feel most spiritually fed when I have these kind of meaningful conversations with people who are on the journey. And that's where I really benefit and grow at this point.
Absolutely. So where do you stand in regards to Christendom? How, like, do you identify as a Christian? Do you avidly not identify as a Christian? Is it a sort of complicated relationship if we're talking Facebook statuses? Like, where are you at these days?
I feel like on a professional level, I still work at the intersection of a lot of that, because so many of the people that I interact with are coming from that evangelical background. Yeah. And so they relate to me because of that experience. And like we've already touched on, it's like, that's not my goal to make sure they end up back in Christendom, where my goal is to know that they can, if they want to, or they have all these other options. Like, you have to be in church to have a relationship with God, right? Yeah. On a personal level, I think I identify more as a person of faith, and I do more interfaith work, and I can appreciate different practices from different faith backgrounds. And I love learning about those things. Like, those are really life-giving to me, to learn like why people believe what they believe and what brings them to that space. And so I would say I'm more of a person of faith, and I still appreciate spirituality. Yeah. Just leaning into it in different ways than I was raised to.
Absolutely. I kind of on TikTok, my handle is spiritually NB Leo WT. Ironically, I've come out 4 times in my life, and the first time was a lesbian, the second time was a trans man, the third time was as non-binary, and the fourth time was as a religious professional. And I identify, I am non-binary. I don't identify as non-binary. I'm fucking non-binary, motherfucker. They, them, all the way. But I identify much in that same way spiritually. And that's something that I've really come to learn over the past year and a half, 2 years, really since the beginning of COVID. I was just not engaging with church for a long time, because I actually had tried to be ordained 3 times and got shut down 3 times. So I kind of just said, screw it. Like, obviously, this is not the place for me.
3 times is not a charm.
Yeah, no, not a charm. But I realized during the pandemic that there was no religious voice speaking up during the Black Lives Matter movement, especially in my town. And I was like, you know what? Fuck it. I got a collar in my drawer. I got a degree in my back pocket, and I got an ordination from the Universal Life Church, which, no, anyone watching, it's not a real ordination, in case my ordination committee is watching. But I was like, you know what? I have the education and the background to stand up and say, this is not that, you know? And I started sort of dipping my toe back into the water of spirituality. And I revamped conversations to happen on a digital platform because I realized people needed spiritually minded community. And I restarted my studies, right, for my master's degree. And I live in that intersection of spiritualities, like you said. And I've really come to believe that, like, I identify as spiritually non-binary because I think theology is a queer concept, and I think interfaith work and inter-ideological work is where I really come alive, and I think it's where the world really heals and becomes a better place. So I speak fluent Christian, and I identify as Christian because someone's got to come get their drunk uncle. You know, like I am that person, and the drunk uncle is Christianity, but it's not what I thought it once was, right?
Yeah.
And I find more life-giving moments and more validation. And frankly, I find more spiritual expanse when I engage with the intersections. And so I totally get what you're saying there. And I think it's so important to have those conversations because we need to realize sometimes people get into like identity politics and say we're fracturing the world by being different, but no, we're not. We're just existing, and we're existing as different people but together. And that's what makes democracy, that's what makes spirituality, that's what makes biodiversity, that's what makes the world, is when we all come together in this space and we put ourselves out there and we exist together, you know. And I think at those intersections is where I find a lot of validation these days.
I do too. Yeah, absolutely. I've never heard that term, spiritual non-binary. I love that.
Yeah, I'm TM there, but you know, feel free to use it as long as you toss some credit this way. So
I might. I think I do that.
I don't want to be patronizing, right? Because what I've been focusing my studies on for my master's program is interreligious studies. And one of those things I've been studying is particularly Abrahamic faiths in conversation. That's actually a class I took. And in that, I don't want to be colorblind, like people who say they don't see race. Like, get the fuck out of here. If you're a Black person, you see race every day, right? But I don't want to not see the differences. I'm just saying I want to be enhanced by them, and I want to learn from them, you know. And so spiritually non-binary is where I live these days. My PhD is either going to be in a queer theology or interreligious relationships. So we'll see. But
I love that.
Yeah, feel free to use it. Feel free to swim around with it too, because it's the first thing that made sense to me. I always say that if I would have been born a boy, I would have been equally as confused as if I was born because I would have been like, I am not that, honey, and I don't know how to fix it, you know. But I feel like that relates to what I'm feeling spiritually, and I'm not afraid of it anymore. I'm just diving in. It's kind of why I started the heretic brand. Was like, well, if you're going to call me this, I mean, really, a heretic is just someone who pushes up the boundaries against the boundaries of their faith in order to know. I'm okay with being one who pushes up against things to know more. And I think that's what happens when you come out in our world. Just asserting your existence as a gay person from your background is pushing up against the boundaries of what you were told, right?
Yeah. Oh, I love that.
Yeah. Well, hey, thanks for coming on to my TED Talk. See you later. No, I'm just kidding. But I'd love for you to tell me about the work that you're doing now, because we actually got connected over this sort of let's say compilation of your story has brought you to a really cool place where you're doing a very necessary work. And I would love for you to share some of that with us, because I think you're hitting those spiritually non-binary notes with the work you're doing now. So I'd love for you to share about that with us.
Yeah. So during the pandemic, this is kind of my pandemic baby, because obviously our work was really impacted by the pandemic, and things shifted for people who are artists. And so I ended up launching this online spiritual community, and it is full of people who, so it's a member-based community. So people pay $30 a month to be a part of it. It keeps the trolls away, which is great.
Yes.
And then people have this safe space. And so I just loved it because it's brought people from a lot of them from evangelical backgrounds who are now deconstructing, brought them into this safe space where they can be themselves, ask the hard questions, they can be seen for who they are. And it just is like this safe haven for these people. And it's probably about 70% LGBTQ plus, and 30% of like allies and parents of LGBT kids and kind of thing, affirming faith leaders. And so it's just this really beautiful collective. We've called it the Unashamed Love Collective. And it's just this beautiful collection of people that I feel like are really diverse, because we've got people from coast to coast and a few from around the world. We've got people in their early 20s, we've got people in their 70s, we've got everything in between. And so I love that, because we'll dialogue about these topics and we'll ask these questions. And some people have, been living in these spaces for a long time and have seen, social justice evolve over the last 50 to 70 years. And some people are new, just baby queer, coming out and asking these questions. And I love all of it. And so it's just become this beautiful community. And then we read a book each month by an LGBTQ author or ally, and we discuss it throughout the month. And at the end of the month, we gather virtually online and we have breakout groups and we talk and we dialogue. And then we host a live discussion with the author of our book.
Oh, that's so cool.
It's been really great. We've hosted some great authors, and we only open registration twice a year because I like to keep it safe. I like to keep it closed off where there's not this, I feel like when there's a constant influx of people coming and going, it's hard to have like kind of this safe space.
Absolutely.
And so sign up for a season, which is 6 months at a time, and then it's closed and nobody can come in or out during that time, and they can just connect with one another. And so we have like, times in the middle of the month where people just get together online to just hang out, and sometimes they play games or sometimes they just chat. And so we always have like our mid-month hangout, and then we have like our formal gathering at the end of the month, and we have quarterly gatherings that are open to the public where we dialogue about different topics like purity culture and conversion therapy and anti-racism work and mental health and boundaries. And so we host like one special event each quarter where it's open to the public and people get to be a part of it, and we discuss some of these topics.
Very cool.
And something I've really fallen in love with. Like, people are just incredible, and I feel like they really show up for one another. Like, it gets in and posts like, I'm having a really hard time with my family member, or I'm going through a divorce, or I'm getting married, or like everybody just really rallies around and supports and shows up. And I just love that you can be seen in this space and that you can be who you are, and then feel like really supported. I love it.
Yeah, I feel like some people shit on religion, which like shit away. There's been a lot of bad stuff that's been done in names of religion. But when you look at religion and the institution of the church as a sociological function, it's not disappearing. It's not going anywhere. So instead of trying to fight to burn it down, maybe we can seek to understand what these functions give the world and perhaps remake them in a better way. Right. And I think one of the main functions of church is integrating your spirituality, like a vertical relationship with you and whatever is beyond, right? And even if you're an atheist, there's still things beyond, right? There's this internal world, there's this ether out there, right? But what church and spirituality does is it sort of takes that internal experience you have with divinity and shares it horizontally with people in your life, right? So there's this sort of connection of community that we need. And I think that stuff like what you're doing, what we do here on Conversations, it builds that interconnectedness that people crave. And that's, I think, one of the biggest things we've seen from the pandemic is like, we need connection. And it can be like, if depending on your generation, true connection can happen in moments like this. Like, I've made so many dope ass friends through the pandemic, and I've never met them in real life, to be honest. People that I've worked with on a weekly basis to do social justice advocacy in my area, and we've met once in 2 years. And literally they're like my brother from another mother. I'm going to call them up and like see if they want to go to the Bills game together. Go Bills, champions of the East, whatever. And I think that your community is doing that, and that's why it's impactful and life-giving. Is it's a synergy, right? Of it's an externalizing of this internal spirituality that brings you closer to your neighbor, whether it's your neighbor physically or digitally. And I think that that's massively important in terms of a sociological function.
Absolutely. And what we're seeing too now is like as we grow, people are finding other community members in their area, so it's like, oh, you live in Colorado, I live in Colorado, let's get together and go to the park, let's go do this, or we've
Yeah.
had somebody recently got married, and one of the other members was from Florida, but she's like, oh, I'm going to be up there right around the time of your wedding, how about I come to your wedding? And they came to the wedding, and like,
That's so cool.
or we did like Secret Santa gift exchange, and one of the people that were matched with each other found out that they both knew somebody in this like tiny town where it was like somebody's brother-in-law, and they knew these people, and like they found out they had this connection in the middle of nowhere. And so it's just been so cool to see like people connect and vibe and get to know one another and just build this like family, this safe space.
Yeah, building real relationships, right? And
a place to belong.
Yeah, absolutely. That belonging, that community, that's so essential, especially for, I found that for me coming out from an evangelical environment. And when I say an evangelical environment, like, you understand the seriousness of this statement, but for those of you who don't know, I did not merely drink the Kool-Aid. I double fisted and pounded the Kool-Aid. It was the core of my being. From the time I was 5, I understood myself to be a person who was called to ministry. I went to college to do that. I did internships to do that. All of my relationships were formed around that. All of my mentors were formed around that. And the instant I came out, it was gone. And so spaces like your collective like conversation are spaces for people to rebuild a system that they belong to. And I think that yeah, and in the immortal words of the recently passed away Desmond Tutu, like, I am because you are. He gave an interview about how like we learn how to be human because of those in our village. And I think that's the same principle we see here. We see our humanity reflected in our relationships with others. And in these sort of spiritually minded but open postured communities, we can see the most beautiful things form.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and it's, rebuilding a value. I used to understand my life based on this one system, and then this system said, fuck you. And so I found another system that was like, hell yeah.
We need a new system.
Exactly. And it works. And people like you are doing the work. And I think that's utterly amazing. So I know you got another appointment to get to. So I'd love to pull everything together with these 2 questions that I ask everybody. So I didn't tell you them ahead of time because I like to see the shock and awe and just traumatic response when I ask them to people. But if people were only going to understand one thing from this conversation, what would you want them to take away from it? See, shock and awe.
I thought you were going to say like one thing from life. One thing.
No.
I was like, oh dear. One thing from this conversation that I can do. The world and life and all that lies beyond, I don't know about that. But this conversation, you belong. Like, there's a place of belonging for you. Community is important. We need one another. And there are spaces that create that you can find belonging in. And I think it's one of the richest gifts that as queer people, once we start finding our people and we start finding those people that have had similar experiences, and like that's what I love about this collective is I feel like everybody's had some kind of similar coming out, deconstructing experience, and we can just all be like, yes, I get that on a level that nobody else gets this on. Like, they can come and share it here because people get it here, and literally nobody else in their life gets this. Yeah. And get it in this space. And so feeling seen and feeling heard and knowing that you belong, I think is one of the greatest gifts.
Absolutely. It's such a beautiful work that you do. As you were saying, that something came to mind, like stop forcing yourself to fit in a community that doesn't want you to fit in it. I've done that for a long time. I know from hearing your story that you've done that as well. There are communities that exist that will welcome you and celebrate you without changing one damn thing. Yes. Right? Stop trying to fit in a community that doesn't want you to fit in it, because there's someone out there, there is a group of someone's out there that will welcome you with open arms. So
yeah, and show up for you and be there for you when you need it.
Yes. Yes, do the things that true community does, right? So the last question is not nearly as horrifying, but would you just do us a favor and run down all the ways that people can contact you? This is your moment to sell every little thing about you that you want to put out there. Give us the links, give us the deets, let us know.
Well, the collective registration opens February 1st. That is the most important thing I want you to know, because we want you to come join us. And so February 1st, registration opens. Season 4 launches March 1st. So you have all of February to join, but I wouldn't wait because spaces are limited.
Okay.
And so you can go on to unashamedlovecollective.com.
Okay.
Unashamedlovecollective.com. And that is where you can register starting February 1st. Or you can go on now and just check it out and look around and kind of get a vibe for things. And then if you join, you'll be invited into a private community that's on Facebook that is not accessible. People can't see that you're in there. People don't know that you're in there. It's only available to those who have a paid membership. So you're like totally hidden from the outside world. It's not like people can see that you're a part of this group. You can find out more about me on ambercantorna.com. And that has all of my information about writing, about speaking, about my books. Refocusing My Family and Unashamed can both be purchased on Amazon or your local bookstore. And then social media, I'm at Amber N as in Nicole, Amber N Cantorna across all platforms. So,
okay, awesome. Quick question, because I live in an incredibly economically depressed area. Do you have scholarship options for folks who might want to be involved? Okay, cool.
Absolutely.
And they can find that
We
on
can
your
have
website.
a limited number of scholarships each season. We never want finances to be a barrier. I always want people that are part of it to and want to belong to have a space. So we do a number of scholarships each season.
Awesome. So that paywall just essentially builds the walls of protection around the people who are in there, right? Very cool.
Absolutely.
Awesome. Well, that's so good to know. I just wanted to make sure that we put that out there for folks.
Yeah, thank you for thinking of that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Really appreciate it.
Amber, it's been delightful to talk to you. I'm totally expecting an ad in my Facebook feed, like Amber N wants to be friends with you shortly. And like, if I don't get it in like the next 30 minutes, I'm going to be a little pissed. I'm just kidding.
Let's make it happen.
But you were fantastic. Thank you for sharing the ripping of your purity pledge. That is monumentous. Yes. I'm so proud of you.
I'm glad I had somewhere to share it. Like that felt good.
Gosh.
Share it.
I'm going to call you back when I find mine and tear it up in front of you.
Yes.
But thank you so much for coming on, Amber. I can't wait to see what happens with this collective. I'm definitely going to get on there and check it out myself. Awesome. Thank you for everybody who watched. Like Amber said, you matter and you are valued and you have a space where you belong. And I encourage you to find that at unashamedlovecollective.org, to find that through conversations or to find it wherever you can find space where you are accepted and celebrated, because don't accept anything less than being celebrated. The season of toleration is over and the season of celebration is here. So find your place and find your people, because I guarantee you, if a weirdo like me can belong somewhere, you can belong somewhere too. This has been Conversations. Thank you so much for joining, and I look forward to seeing you guys back next week on the program.
Thanks for having me.
Bye, Amber.
Bye.
This has been the Conversations podcast. Thank you so much for joining. If you have any questions or comments, or just want to get involved, feel free to join the conversation on social media. You can find us at Conversations Official on Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube. And please don't forget to rate, follow, and share this podcast. We're available on Anchor, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Thank you so much for joining the conversation.